Hello, my name is Pastor Christen Sanders, and I serve as the youth and young adult pastor at D1NAS. Just to give you a little bit of background information about me and my journey working with young adults, I graduated from Olivet Nazarene University in 2009 with a degree in pastoral ministry. I'm currently back in school to get my master's in missional multiplication, but ever since graduating, serving young adults has been one of my largest passions within the church. I led young adult ministries in both Michigan and Indiana before coming to Illinois. Before we begin, I want to let you know that the age groups that we'll be talking about are primarily that of 18 to 22 and 23 to 30 years old, in those ranges. Young adults can look different for all of us depending on the context of your church, but when we talk about young adults, we need to look at them not as one big group as we tend to, but at least two different groups. You might also be asking, who are young adults? Like, who are we talking about? Exactly. Young adults truly are the unicorns within the church. Are they college age? Are they singles? Are they young marrieds? Are they students or professionals? The answer to all of that is yes. That's why we need to separate them into at least two different groups if we want to be effective. But we don't necessarily need to make it about their age, but we need to make it more about their life stage. As you can imagine, a 26-year-old who has a full-time job, lives on their own, and works a 9 to 5 isn't going to have a ton in common with a 20-year-old college student who lives at home, works retail, and is up super late every night because they've either procrastinated the paper that was due or they're playing video games with their buddies. Now, I'm not going to say they have nothing in common. There are some commonalities between these two different people, though. They want to hear messages about singleness and or dating or finding their path or direction, about their identity or where they belong in this world. And these are all messages or topics that are often not talked about from the pulpit on a Sunday morning, as it misses about 85% or more of the congregation. So why would we talk about it from the pulpit? But with young adults, we are in an odd space where we are tending to the child who has just left youth group, and we're also trying to disciple them to be the next generation of the church as church board members, leaders of ministries, and such. They don't really feel like they belong anywhere. So why is it any surprise that they are leaving the church at an alarming rate? There are many factors as to why young adults are leaving the church. Many of our first assumptions are that they want the worship style changed, or that we can't speak their language when it comes to technology. But in his book, Hipster Community, When Church and Cool Collide, Brett McCracken states that young adults are not leaving the church because they don't find the cool factor there. They're leaving the church because they don't find Jesus there. So what do we do with that? Maybe that's why you're here. Maybe you're wanting to figure out where to start with young adults. Maybe you're here because you're passionate about figuring out how to stop this mass exodus from the church. So I'm going to lay out a few things for you. Practical tips, some expectations, some of the struggles and help, and that maybe some help that you can see from maybe a different kind of lens that you should be looking from. So first, let's start with trying to understand young adults a little bit. I already mentioned that we're trying to put the college age student in with the working professional, which isn't the best approach. So first identify what age group you're targeting. Once you've identified that, I want to give you a word of caution. If your first inclination is to start a Sunday school class, I would strongly suggest that you erase that idea from your mind, if at all possible, because the likelihood is that you're going to get poor attendance, poor participation, and a large dose of discouragement. So I figured that I'd save you from that one. According to Jen Hatmaker's book, For the Love, Fighting for Grace in a World of the Impossible, she points out that the latest research reveals that when young adults between the ages of 18 and 35 are polled nationwide and asked, what would draw you or keep you at church? They listed these four tenets. 1, community. 2, social justice. 3, depth. And 4, mentorship. So if a Sunday school class doesn't work, what does? Well, let's first look at the aspect of community. Young adults don't want something super organized, and they definitely don't want to meet at the church on a regular basis. They want a place where they can show up and be themselves and have a place where they feel like they belong. In my personal experience, young adult small groups have been the best way to start. We've started them in someone's homes, thanks parents a lot of the time, in a basement or living room, and food or snacks are always something that helps. But what would happen almost every single time is we'd start out with 3 to 5 people, and then within 3 to 6 months, we'd be in the teens with our numbers, because once young adults feel like they have a safe place, they start talking about it to other young adults who are looking for the same thing. What ends up happening is you have people across denominational lines coming too. But I believe that a large part of the success was the fact that it was a group led by peers. Because in both of these situations, in my past experience, I was viewed as their peer. The personal struggle I've started having, though, is because I'm becoming more and more irrelevant. Their ages hasn't changed, but mine sure has. I've grown older. I'm no longer viewed as much as their peer. I've been blessed, though, because I don't look my age and that I'm single, so they forget that I'm closer to double their age, the early college age students at least. So this leads to number 4 on our list of the 4 tenets. Students are looking for mentorship. I'm finding my role as leader or pastor to this group is shifting significantly. As we're all called to do, my role has become more of a discipler. I recently spoke to one of my young adults who's 18 years old, but has tons of leadership potential, about taking over some of the leadership in the small group. And his response was, "What's worse than an 18-year-old leader?" And I tried to remind him that Jesus' disciples were all teenagers. But what this points to is that many of them don't feel like they have the confidence or experience to lead. But what I highly suggest you don't do is place all the responsibility on one person. I typically look for at least 4 leaders for any young adult ministry. 2 people to lead or guide the small group discussion, 1 person to handle communication, and 1 person to plan events. Now you might be wide-eyed right now saying, "You want me to find 4 people?" You can do that with 2 if they're willing to consistently shoulder all the responsibilities. But to avoid burnout, I'd suggest the best case scenario to be 4. In that third tenet, depth, not death, sorry, I want to challenge you and your church to loosen your grip on a couple things. I'm going to pull an excerpt from the book Sustainable Young Adult Ministry by Mark DeVries and Scott Pointier. This has been one of the most absolute favorite resources. So if you're wanting to get a very helpful tool to get started, this is where I'd recommend starting. So I'm actually going to read just a small little portion of it from page 66 on to 68. And so we're talking about young adults, and it says, for their entire lives, young adults have literally had the world at their fingertips. As kids, they're interconnected with the world around them, and today they've grown into CEOs of tech startups, small business owners, and founders of nonprofits by the time they're in their mid-20s. Many popular sports figures and cultural icons are downright ancient by the time they hit 35. Yet, this is the generation most churches sideline for leadership because they are, quote unquote, not ready. Australian ministry specialist Fuzz Kiddo remarks, I have a friend, when he was 23, had an income of over $100,000 a year. He managed over 1,000 employees. Decisions he made before breakfast affected the economic policies of the entire Australian region. But when I go to church, he reflected, they treat me like a kid. In another congregation in which I served as a consultant, a 25-year-old who was a consultant accountant managing a multi-million-dollar budget was rejected as a member of the finance committee. The reason? He's too young and inexperienced to understand how the finances of the church really work. And as a single person, he hasn't had to deal with the major life issues of balancing a budget for his family. In other words, he's not an adult. I recently read about a church who was in the process of electing the next group of elders to the board. As they discussed potential nominees for the position, they spent lots of time talking about a particular 35-year-old nominee. They decided that although he had spiritual and leadership qualifications, he was just too young to hold such a leadership position as an elder in the church. Instead, they elected him as an elder in training. Isn't it fascinating that someone old enough to be elected President of the United States often isn't considered old enough to hold a significant leadership position in many of our churches? Young adults are fast becoming our culture's leading innovators, business leaders, entertainment icons, and world changers. And what is the church telling them? You're not quite ready yet. Maybe after you've paid your dues and been a faithful attender and contributor for a few more decades, we'll invite you to serve on a committee. What we tend to communicate to our young adults is that you are too young or you don't have enough experience. But in the real world, many of our young adults are already doing some pretty awesome things. And I believe this is part of that depth portion, which is something that young adults are looking for, which also points us to the second tenet, which is social justice. Young adults don't want to be a part of a church that is a building. They want to be a part of a church that is a body of world changers. You may look at young adults and only see them as a group of kids that like video games or sleeping in, but have you asked them recently what they are truly passionate about or what they'd like to see in the world to change? I'll bet you could start your small group with a full month's worth of discussions just based on those passions. I know I've thrown a lot of information at you, and truthfully, we could sit here all day and talk about young adult ministry. So let's get to some of those tips and expectations. Young adults don't need teachers to explain faith to them. They need mentors and coaches to cheer them on and walk with them. Be there for them, help them grow, and internalize what they are learning about Jesus and how that impacts their life. Expect to start the ministry, but also expect for it to evolve into a mentorship instead of leading it for years. They're longing for safe spaces. They need a space where they can feel comfortable being themselves and being in a group that's always there for them. Expect to get it wrong. No group of young adults is the same. I've led a group that was all about sports. My current group cares nothing about sports. Be flexible. Don't get discouraged when they're flaky, and don't take it personal. Our current young adult group fluctuates in size from 3 to 15 on any given week, but be flexible. Have I said that already? Our current group meets at 9:30 p.m. at my house on Monday nights. You might be asking if you heard that correctly, but you definitely did. 9:30 p.m. on Monday nights. You see, most of these young adults work in retail, and they can't get out of work until 9 p.m. So they grab some fast food on their way over, and we start at 9:30. So it's important to meet them where they are. A 7 p.m. group wouldn't work for them, so we adapt to meet their needs. Anything you don't have to do yourself, let them do it. Don't expect to use Facebook as your form of communication. The vast majority of young adults use Snapchat, so be flexible. Encourage your congregation to see the value in young adults. 1 Timothy 4:12 says, "Don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech, in life, in love, in faith, and in purity." Let them surprise you and be a constant encouragement. I can't reiterate enough how important it is to be flexible and to throw out all expectations. They don't want someone who has it all together. They don't want something really structured, but they do want a safe place and a caring environment. They need to know that what is said there stays there among the group. They need to know that they aren't going to get kicked out if a cuss word comes out. They need to feel free to show up in their sweatpants, or that they aren't going to be ridiculed for their thoughts or their beliefs. If you were to ask me one of my greatest successes from 2020 in youth and young adult ministry, this is what I would tell you. I had 2 separate sets of parents come to me and tell me that their kid had never ever, when they were in youth group or growing up, had gone to any event ever with the church. No church camps, amusement park trips, none of it. And they grew up in the church. But these students came to our young adult retreat. The hope and the joy and honestly the relief that these parents expressed became one of my favorite parts of 2020. Because to me, it was a step in the right direction. These young adults had found a safe place. When I was feeling some discouragement recently regarding our young adult ministry, I had one of my youth volunteers remind me that a year and a half ago, this church had nothing for young adults, and that sometimes we need to celebrate the fact that we have something for young adults, even if it isn't at the benchmark you've set for yourself. So doing something is better than doing nothing. Be flexible and willing to learn in a safe and non-judgmental, and more than anything else, cover your ministry in prayer, and God will see you through. I'd like to finalize my time with you with providing my contact information to you. If you want to continue this discussion, you can reach me via email at Pastor Christen, that's Pastor, and my first name is Christen, Pastor Christen at d1nas.com. Let me pray over you. Father God, I thank you for every single person that is watching this presentation right now, Father. They're not watching it by accident. There's a reason that they have come here. And most likely that reason is because they love young adults. They see the problem with the mass exodus that's happening within the church in this age group. Father, I pray that you will give them guidance. I pray that you will give them leaders, that you will help them mentor and see skills within these young adults so that they can pour into them. God, I pray for this next generation of leaders within the church. Father, I pray that they will not see themselves as someone who is not capable, but they will see you as capable, and you within them makes them capable. God, we love you, we praise you, and we thank you for young adults. And we thank you for these leaders who are so passionate about bringing young adult ministry into their church. We love you and we praise you. Amen.